Today we are talking with T. John Mayhaw from SERVPRO of Mobile. And T. John has earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from the Belk College of Business at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Since then, he has made it his life's work to help businesses build, grow, and succeed. His experience ranges a variety of industries, including environmental technologies, wholesale distribution, and land development. T. John served as regional and corporate vice president focused on strategic development and expansion. His passion is helping businesses become a success. He has enjoyed applying his knowledge, experience, and drive as co-owner of SERVPRO of Mobile County. He and his wife, Amanda, have two beautiful children, Jack and Hannah. T. John enjoys spending time with his extended family, cooking and fishing. And I will now turn it over to Craig and T. John.
Thank you, Julie. T. John, he likes long walks on the beach.
I know.
Pina coladas and getting caught in the rain.
Every time I hear that intro, I go, I gotta get somebody to rewrite that. I love that it's my life's work too. Yeah. The reality is my life's work is to work enough to feed those two beautiful children who are a pain, and everybody else can keep them on the street and stuff.
How are you doing on video? We're good? Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. I mean, what time zone you're joining us from. Welcome to Flood News at Noon. Again, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate everybody who's taking the time to, take off work, take lunch break, whatever happens to do, get out from a deployment or whatever, but actually spend the time joining us today to listen to this presentation. We are live today, which is unique. It's the first time we've actually been live on location, and we're live on location here at SERVPRO of Mobile County, which it's ironic that we're here live because just tell you a little story. Just yesterday, we usually do these broadcasts from our office. So we have everything. We're actually in the process of building a broadcast booth so we can provide better quality videos, better audio, better training from our broadcast booth. So we usually do our broadcast from there. Well, just yesterday, roughly about 7:15, I just happened to go in the office because we had some Exactamente training going on. We had our property team getting in there and stuff. So I just happened to go in the office a little early, make sure things were going smooth for what was going on. And I just happened to look downstairs during the main hallway that we have that separates our training theater with our property department. And there is just gushing water everywhere. And I mean, it is just everywhere. And so, of course, I spring in action. I run downstairs. I'm looking around, see what's going on. And we had a water fountain that actually busted. And I mean, it is pouring water out all over the floor. It's just going everywhere. It's in the bathrooms. It's in the hallway. It's in the property department and the big red, as we call it, kind of the big red property department claims area. It's getting close to the elevators. It's pouring out the back door. I mean, I'm talking about it's everywhere. So, of course, I spring into action. I grabbed a mop. I grabbed a broom. I grabbed a bucket. And then I picked up my phone and I called SERVPRO. And I was like, okay. So it could have been a lot worse. I'll tell you right now. I called SERVPRO. Within about 30 minutes, they were on site. They were assessing everything. They were taking a look at everything. Could have been worse. Property department people came out. They started mopping up everything. It took us about 20 minutes to actually shut this water off. I mean, let's say it's pouring in. It's just gallons of water coming out of this water fountain. So we got most of the water extracted. But anyway, SERVPRO shows up. They come out there. They assessed everything. They get their team out there. They set up their equipment, and everything's running, and everything is drying, and everything's we're trying to dry these building materials that actually got wet. So, and I'm out there, and I'm looking around, and I have to admit, when I walked in and saw this equipment, my first reaction was like, oh my God, what is all this equipment doing? What is all this stuff? Where did it all come from? And to me, that is your typical policyholder. And really, in reality, that's a typical adjuster. We go out to a loss. We're experiencing a loss. We're involved in it somehow, some way. And we're out there looking at this loss. And we walk through a property and we see all this drying equipment. Do we really know what it's for? Do we know what it's doing? Is it being put in the right place? We have experts, and I'm not referring to I'm quoting experts, we have experts out there putting all this equipment out there. Do we really, truly know as an adjuster, and from a policyholder, what this equipment is doing? Is it doing its job? You know, we're obviously going to get a drying log. Well, we should get a drying log. That's going to give us some insight into what's going on. But at the same time, do we know really what's going on with this equipment? What's it there for? Why is it there? Do we have the equipment? Do we have the right equipment? So there's so many questions that we address, and it's so ironic that this just happened yesterday, and here I'm looking at the whole situation going, I have no idea what half of this stuff for. Well, that's what T. John is here for. He is going to actually introduce us to this equipment. He is going to tell us about this equipment, what we're doing, so that when you're out there adjusting a claim and you're looking at these pieces, not only can you have a confident conversation with the policyholder, but also the mitigation company, the people that are actually putting this in place. You know what it's there for, and you can say, hey, why do we have this? What's this for? Do we really need this gigantic dehue that's sitting in the house now, and do we need 10 of them? And so you can actually have that conversation. The way I look at this, you know, learning this is part of our training and things we do. And when we have these flood news and noon sessions, it's to talk about things like this, because the more we understand, the more we're educated, the more we can provide better customer service to our policyholders out there. They can understand from our education, from our experience, what these items are and what they're used for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, because I know we as adjusters, me as a policyholder in this situation,
Yeah.
we have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions about what we have here. What's it for? What are we going to do with it? It's all yours.
And those are the answers that we have. You know, it's funny that you tell that story, and this is hand to God to Jesse, who's here in the room with us, who works with a lot of our adjusting partners. You tell it from the perspective of the policyholder, and your initial reaction was, gosh, what do we need all this? The funniest, this is honestly true, when they were loading up equipment, I happened to go into the warehouse as they were wrapping it up, and I looked back into the vehicle, and based on our conversation that morning, what you were describing of what had taken place and how much water was down, I looked in the vehicle and I went, oh, that's not that much. And off we went. And you know, it is. There's so much. First and foremost, thank y'all. You know, we need to start with that. This is actually, I think, the third time that y'all have allowed us to participate in these talks that y'all have, and we love it. We love the ability to try to interact with the adjusting community and try to educate and kind of give a little sense of what we do. But yeah, the equipment is a big piece, because the reality is the equipment is what really drives quite a bit of the numbers and the cost around any one of the claims. And at the same time, it has the most mystery. You see an actual person on a crew pulling a piece of drywall. That's tangible. That's easy. I get it. That's wet. We need to pull that out. I can wrap my head around it. But to your point, if you see all of this sitting in your lobby or in your home, you don't understand the ratios of, well, how much do I really need? What's too much? What's not enough? How do I understand? So yeah, we're going to do a couple things today. Real excited to go through with you all. The first of which is we're going to talk about the equipment. The second of which is we're going to talk a little bit about counts and placement and things of that nature. So we're going to back and forth a touch through these slides where you're going to see the presentation on some and be saved from having to stare at Craig and I. And others, we're going to be kind of walking through and showing pieces of the equipment. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get after it, take a look at what we're doing.
And can we do a live demonstration here with the water? Actually, can we turn a faucet on?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to.
That's perfect.
That's part of our training process.
And that's one thing that I wish I did. After you're going through the whole process, you see all this water. After we shut the water off finally after 20 minutes, I pulled the video camera out and I was like, why didn't I get that in action? I mean, we're going to get the water extraction taking place, but why didn't I get that in action? But anyway, go ahead. So
no, and it's a thing. And actually we do, oddly enough, you say that when we train on rovers and things like that, this is the space that we use. We clear this out and have people ride around and things. Nice. So first and foremost, some of the equipment we're going to talk about, we're going to kind of run the gambit of what we see as the standard pieces of equipment in storm events and flood events, obviously, but also in our day-to-day, but we really see them quite a bit on storm. One is obviously the extraction piece of it, how we get the water up, the air movers to get everything, or fans, everybody just prefers to call. I just get yelled at when I call them fans, doesn't sound technical enough. To move air to get everything dried out, dehumidification, how we manage power constraints, and even air scrubbers or HEPA filtration although we all know it's not covered, but we have to make sure that we've got it in some cases if the customer's looking for it. So first and foremost, let's jump into the air movers. They're the easy ones to kind of jump in and understand what they are. The extractors. Let's jump into the extractors first. So the extraction units, and y'all should be hopefully seeing the presentation at this point. There's really two types of extraction that we deal with. If we can move to the next slide, Chris, if you don't mind. Two types of extraction that we deal with. There's portable extraction and truck mounted. It's very simple and straightforward as far as what these are used for. There's no need to make it overly complicated. The biggest reason that we choose one over the other, especially in storm situations, has everything to do with power and accessibility. If the structure has power, then sometimes the portables are the best way to go because we can get in and out of spaces easier. We're not having to drag hoses everywhere. Now portables have enough power to the unit that they rival the gas-mounted or gas-powered truck-mounted extractors. But as we all know, on storm situations, sometimes power is a luxury that we are not afforded and we don't have it to work with. In those cases, you really have to have the truck-mounted pieces. Another place that we go, and we ran into this a lot in the last two hurricanes. Us personally, we were in 4 high-rises downtown for both hurricanes because of a lot of the wind-driven rain. You have to have these portables in that case because you just can't drag. We had the RSA tower from the 33rd floor, I believe, to the 8th. Every single floor was affected. And you have to have the portables in that situation because truthfully, you can't drag hoses up that high. Your effectiveness or efficiency around being able to extract that water is compromised so badly that you have to have something that creates the proper amount of suction. You lose too much in the lift. So that's the simple process around extraction. A lot of it's driven by what resources you have for power and how you go from there.
So a question on extraction on these units. So sometimes we run the situation where there's a lot of water that's being extracted. And we get a big bill that comes in, a big invoice comes in. We look at it and go, wow, that's for the big. Do these units actually tell you how many gallons or how much quantity it's extracting out?
Great question. They don't. And I'll tell you how we deal with it. Again, a lot, and we've said this before, I think in some of the previous presentations we've been a part of, we'll always say kind of from our perspective, our way is not the only way. Obviously, you're going to see a lot of things, but how we deal with it in our company is it's all quantifiable. When you look at a space, you have square footage, floor square footage in this case, and then if you have a depth of water that you're working within, you can calculate an approximate amount of water that you've had to draw out to go ahead and get all the water extracted. A lot of times what you'll end up having to do, and we've done this quite a bit in working with large loss adjusters and storm adjusters, is you have to take kind of a multiple. Case in point, when you look at the definition for extraction, let's say you've got 2,000 square feet of floor area, but if it's 4 inches deep, if you look in the definitions, extraction is 1 inch. So then it's a conversation. It's talking to the adjuster and saying, look, I got to find something fair for me, but fair for the client. So we're going to take this square footage and we're going to multiply it by 1.5, 2, whatever it may be to come up with something that makes sense. It can get out of hand pretty quick though. Yep. If it's 4 inches, you multiply it by 4, you could have $70,000 worth of extraction, which is ridiculous. I mean,
but we have to
necessary.
But we have to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And that's where the key is having that conversation, understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then back and forth so that when it comes in our terms and comes on our reporting, we can explain that to the examiner, whoever's paying the invoice at the time. This is why it's being done this way.
Absolutely. And it's funny, Craig, Julie, and I were talking about this right before this presentation started. The first time we worked with y'all was Hurricane 8 downtown. And when we did that, we sat down with y'all's adjuster prior to submitting to the client and just went through line by line. And I didn't even know it until just this morning. Julie was on that call. And we said, look, we have to get on the same page before you or I submit anything. So we're all on the same front when it gets to the customer.
Must have been somebody out trained. So
it very well may have been. It may have even been somebody you were related to, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure. So the extraction is pretty straightforward, but yes, there's a dynamic to it that there's still communication, even though it's a simple action of just getting water out of the structure. So the next piece, and this is really one of the two that always tend to drive the most controversy in a loss, is the air movers. And the reason is because of just the sheer visual quantity that looks when you go into a site and you see it. In our situation, there's just a sea of green everywhere. As some of our customers know. Yes. And by the way, I was going to tell you, look, if you wanted to make this a paid participation presentation for me, there's a much easier way than flooding your building to have to hire us to do it. I can just take a check. I'm not fine.
Just cash at the table.
That's right. I'm easy. So with the air movers, there's 4 types, and y'all can see this briefly when it was up on the presentation, but really nowadays there's really 3 configurations you see, hopefully more so than anything. And we've got all 3 of them here. The first of which is what's called a Velo, which is the one here on the far left. You've got an Air Max, and the reason for both of these is really there's nothing different in performance. It's all about just efficiency. It's a lot squattier body. It's easier to carry. It's lighter. Most of y'all may have seen what we call the snail or the centrifugal air movers, which are heavy, bulky, impossible to stack, things like that. This similar to this, a little bit smaller. These are all about us. Doesn't do a thing for the client. Doesn't really do anything for the adjuster or anybody else for the carrier. It's just for us to make our lives a little bit easier. The one that I did want to talk a little bit about, because there is a difference when it comes to this is what is called an axial air mover. And the reason it's worth talking about, and see Craig's already smiling, so obviously he knows. So the biggest piece with the axial, 2 pieces that are worth knowing. One is its job is to push a lot more air than frankly either of these 2 do. And it does its job very well. It has a tremendous ability to move a lot of air very effectively throughout a property, which makes a lot of sense. If you have a big open space, you want that kind of power pushing the air to make sure we're passing it through the dehumidifiers and making sure we're drying that air, getting the moisture out of it. The second key piece to this air mover is that it actually bills for a higher rate and Exactimate than these would. So why do I bring it up? The only reason I bring it up is it's one of those wonderful moments. I think I've got a personal philosophy around when we do losses. It's never really doubting or questioning somebody because adjusters are professionals and y'all know your business better than anybody else and how to get things done. And mitigators are as well. So I have no right to tell you how to adjust. And when people question how we mitigate and say, well, you shouldn't have done that, there's always a questionable based off of what. So, but it's just a great opportunity to ask a question why. If you, as an adjusting community and industry, come onto a job and there are 200 of these all over that site, the question is just why? Why did you have to have these axials on the site versus any of these style or the old centrifugals? Why did it have to be this? Now, sometimes the answer is really simple and rudimentary. It's all we had. Okay, well, that's an answer. I can tell you during the hurricanes here in Mobile, there was absolutely a point where that warehouse out back was bone dry. And we had 3 tractor trailers worth of equipment that we brought in to put on jobs that we had as well. And it was just whatever you could get. That's up to me, to us, that's a very fair answer if that's what it is. Because when you're faced with either not accomplishing the goal or putting a piece on that may cost a little more and maybe quote unquote overkill, but it's what has to happen so we can start to dry it, that's a conversation that's worth having. Absolutely. But if you're on a standard large loss, or if you're in a storm situation where there shouldn't be an issue with any kind of accessibility to equipment or the availability to have it, and there's a choice to put these everywhere, it's a fair question to just say, well, help me understand why we have to have something that bills out. I think it's a 12 to 15% increase rate versus standard air movers. Yeah, exactly right. So beyond that, it's a pretty simple, straightforward piece of equipment. It blows in. It helps to dry material. There's a science behind all of that. If at some point we want to give everybody a good nap after lunch, y'all can invite us back. We can explain the science of drying. But for all intents and purposes, the biggest question never comes of what do these do and why do you have them there? It really rolls into more of, do you really need that many? And we'll talk about that a little bit in the future today about around counts. The next piece we're going to talk about, oddly enough, is one of the smaller pieces. You don't see it all the time on a loss, but to me, it's one of the most effective and helpful pieces of equipment that we have. And it's called a spider box. And I think we're going to go ahead and advance in the presentation and flip over so y'all can see it just because it's a little easier. So on this slide, you can see pretty simply that you can adjust. You can adjust the spider box, and what its basic need that it fills is the fact that if you don't have enough power on a site, if you're going to load that site too heavily to where you could possibly jeopardize the electrical system or the wiring within the home, or if it's an older home or business where they have copper or weaker wiring, these are great tools to be able to relieve some of that load to lessen it. Its essential job is it takes 220 and converts it to 110, and it gives us the ability as mitigation professionals to have more equipment or to set the job properly without overloading the home. And more importantly, it bridges that gap between having equipment on there and having to set up a generator versus having the job underset. And when we talk again about placement and quantities on equipment, what we'll find is too much is not okay, obviously, because it ends up costing more money than necessary. But frankly, undersetting a job can be equally dangerous because now we're sitting on the site for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 days. So we want to hit that number exactly where it needs to be. And the spider box is a great tool for us to be able to do that. So, and as we flip back to the camera, just so you know, because it's just tough to see, it gives a little perspective on what it looks like, the size of it. It's not huge, but it is a phenomenal piece of equipment. We'd never go on a storm without at least 2 or 3 of these because they're just a big, big help. We use a ton of these when we do large losses too, because sometimes you have to have a way to distribute all that power coming from a large generator with a desiccant and push it throughout a large space, be it a warehouse, office building, whatever it may be. So the next piece that we're going to look at is actually the dehumidifiers. Another, probably as we were saying, there's 2 pieces that get to people. This is definitely the second. The biggest piece about dehumidifiers is that it is not a one-size-fits-all. Air movers pretty much are. When we get our counts around air movers, it's a set number. That's what we work from. It's a range in all frankness, but it is a set range. With these, it's all about how much water, how much moisture are you pulling out of that atmosphere every day. And so what we try to accomplish is we set various sizes to meet that goal. Now, when you have a desiccant, it's a totally different situation. But what they do is you rate each of these dehumidifiers based off of their pints per day rating. And then our job is to combine them in whatever means or way necessary to reach the pints per day level that's called for by using the formulas through the IICRC. So we're properly dehumidifying everything within the structure. So not a real complex process either. Essentially, we set up everything where water pushes through these, draws in what usually tends to be air that's a little bit warmer and very moist, draws out the moisture over a heat exchange system, and then pumps out hot, dry air and just constantly circulates that so we continue to drive down the humidity in the process. As a general just overview for drying, not to get too deep, the air mover's job is to get the moisture out of the material. The dehumidifier's job, obviously, is then to get the moisture out of the air. That's what the very nuts and bolts portion of how we do things and why we do it. That's why you see them working together.
So currently in our situation, our loss, we have we have 2 or 3 of these sitting in the area. We have probably maybe 20 air movers. So, and these are all positioned in a place where it seems like the air is being pushed to a central area for the moisture to be extracted out of it.
Absolutely.
And see, when you see all this, unfortunately, when you can see it live and really in action, not just with equipment, it begins to make sense what each piece does. So it's good to know that that's how they're intentionally set.
Absolutely.
It's not just throw them out there and go, okay, let's try a building, which unfortunately I think we see a lot.
Yeah.
When we're out there looking at losses as adjusters, we just see equipment and it doesn't make sense. Now when we know, we go out there and we say, okay, it is supposed to be doing something. It's supposed to be pointing in a certain direction, blowing air in a certain direction, and these are not just set randomly throughout a house. There's a reason. And are they actually set in the right location?
Absolutely.
So,
no, you're right. And I'll tell you right now, I won't say hopefully, I'm sure every piece is exactly as it should be, and it has that purpose of your place. But your statement's very true. With a lot of mitigators, it is just thrown out there. And I wish that wasn't the case. Interestingly enough, this happened just 2 nights ago. My wife and I used to live in Houston, had a kind of a friend of a family member. She has a $3 million home, broken pipes all through the home. She had called me to get some input. Got her a SERVPRO that's going to help her out because we're not yet traveling on the storm because of our work we're wrapping up. And before that SERVPRO could show up, another mitigation company showed up that her insurance company sent. They showed up, they had equipment strewn everywhere. She sent me pictures, no rhyme or reason, much of it not even plugged in, and was just pushing to get her sign a piece of paperwork that says, we're going to be your mitigate. And I said, absolutely not. Telling me that they can leave it there. They can take it out tomorrow. The guy's going to be there tomorrow. He'd already had an appointment. And it is very much the truth of our industry that there are people out there that don't look at this as far as doing things the right way. We're no better than anything else. Now, there are painters, electricians, plumbers, possibly even adjusters that just kind of go in and may not do anything exactly the way it's supposed to. I'm sure that's not true, but there are good and bad in everything we do. And so that's why discussions like this are great. And we love to participate in it, because the more we can root out those folks that are giving our industry a bad name, the better it's going to be for everybody who's trying to do it right.
And in that situation you're talking about, if our adjuster just happened to go out to that property before your SERVPRO showed up, we could have gone in and said same thing. We could have given some advice and, this is not the position it should be. These are not where they should be. Let's look at an alternative method. Let's get somebody else out here who actually knows what they're doing. Because the longer the equipment sits that's not put in properly and dressed properly, it just affects the bottom line of the claim. Okay, not only is it going to cause issues with the policyholder, customer service issues, but we run the situation all the time where they just leave the equipment and we go out there and we assess it. We get an invoice, we look at it, and we go, no, this is wrong. This doesn't make sense. And then we say, okay, this is what we're going to make a recommendation for. Well, the policyholder may be at another half of that. They're stuck with that bill at that point. And that's not what the situation we want to be in. That's not really good customer service for everybody. The policyholder just stuck with that whole $50,000, $60,000 invoice that they don't know what to do with.
Absolutely.
And it's a struggle. So if we know when we're out there, we're looking at equipment, we can give them some education. Call the company you're dealing with. Here's what it needs to be done. Here's how it needs to be set. So it's great to know that getting all this information from you helps us do a better job in the field.
Well, and absolutely. And you can, it's giving that input. And sometimes it's just that simple question of why. A lot of times, if I've seen this happen, regrettably, with some mitigators, all you have to do is ask the why. And all of a sudden they start to scramble because they know they're not doing it the way it should be done. Yep. It's just, well, geez, I'm just confused. Why do you have air movers facing 5 different directions? I don't even understand that. Aren't they supposed to be like this? And then it's, well, let's just get that all fixed. And you're right. You deal with it on the front end, and you don't have a customer who's stuck with it on the back end, because frankly, the way it works in storm situations, most mitigators are being paid prior to the customer ever receiving all the funding around the policy itself. So then it's really tough for them to have to go back and deal with that 100%. So the next piece we're going to talk about, that kind of runs us through, for the most part, the equipment side of what we're dealing with. Let's talk a little bit more. Go ahead, Chris, if you don't mind. Thank you, sir. About outside of a standard mitigation loss. Now we are looking at a situation where you have, although we understand it's not something that's covered usually in most flood, and not most, but in all flood applications. But here is something that needs to be taken into consideration, because I've noticed this a lot, Craig, especially in the past 2 years. We have done more storms that have had very little flood on them and a whole lot more wind-driven claims. A lot of claims that are not flood claims that are running through FEMA, and they're running like standard claims, but they're a result of a storm. So the rules tend to shift a little bit. And regrettably, a lot of those storms still, you're not able to get out there and to help people as quick as you may like, or get to everyone as quick as you may like. So you may start to see some of these on jobs, because they do have a place when you start to have growth and things like that, as a result of a house being wet or a business being wet for a certain period of time. And that's the air scrubbers. So the air scrubbers, and here I'll kind of push it to the front in case we look and you need to see it. So the air scrubber, very simple concept, draws in air, has a 4-stage filtration system. They're set based on how much or how often you can turn over the air within that site. No, you had it right. We just pop it off. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just messing with that guy. Yeah, just feel free. Go ahead. Pull it all apart. It's fine. Yeah. We'll tell you. So it's so
I'm probably getting dealt with one right now.
You very well may. But no, the air scrubbers are great, because in that situation, even if you do have a true flood claim, we will actually utilize these in 2 different scenarios. One of which is Harvey was a fantastic example of this. Baton Rouge in 2016 was a great example of this. When we couldn't get into certain areas, Harvey, the neighborhoods were closed off. The city wouldn't allow you to come in to try to service any people until they were sure that it was safe. When we couldn't get in for a period of time, sometimes a week, 2 weeks, then we had to utilize these because we had to protect our people for the environment they were working in. Now, in those situations, again, what we did, we don't bill for it. We have to do that because that's our obligation to our team to make sure they're being taken care of in what they do. We did, second scenario, have situations also with customers. As we go in there and they ask about these, we let them know they're not covered. It's just that conversation. We may set them, we may put them in, but the customer understands that that's going to be an expense that they're going to bear that they may not get reimbursement for. It doesn't change the fact that, quite honestly, it's still a hazardous environment. You still have microbial growth all over that house. And you can't ignore the fact that it's there. Regardless what FEMA may or may not think, it's a very real scenario on storm.
So how does this work?
You know what? Here's the best part about what we do, and the reason I was so drawn to this industry is because it's not much of anything is really complex or hard, so I can follow along pretty well. Essentially, the air is drawn in through the top and then runs through 4 different filters. It filters down to less than 0.6 microns and then exhausts out the front. And we utilize this in a lot of different ways. We can exhaust back into the actual space itself, or you can actually duct it out, create negative pressure, things of that nature to help with containment when you have their kind of mold loss situations. But they're incredibly effective in keeping the environment much, much cleaner and much safer when you're in it. You can tangibly kind of smell and feel the difference when these are running in an environment from when you first walk into a loss to when this has had some time to turn the air over and really clean it up. We have a large fire. Some of y'all may have heard about it. We had a very big fire here recently in Mobile that we're working with that owner, where we'll have a tremendous amount of air filtration and HEPA filtration on that site.
So what devices do you use to record the air during the process? Are you recording something to get some record of what is in the air at the time and how much is being exhausted or how much is being extracted out?
Mm-hmm. No,
how many times you monitor this, change out filters, things like that? Is that part of the process?
Yes. No, absolutely. It's a great question. So the first question is, how are we monitoring the air? Each of these devices are much like dehumidifiers. They only will turn a certain volume of air within a period of time. Okay. So then it's simply a calculation of you want to turn the air over in a space that you're trying to treat 6 times. And so you just need to make sure you place enough equipment to hit that mark. And that mark is established by OSHA and things of that nature. Okay. So we don't have to measure.
It's not just a guess. You don't walk and go, I put 50 in here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, it's kind of stinky. Let's just do double. Yeah, it's like with water. It's like, wow, it's really wet. We should just do twice as much dehu.
Well, it's funny. That's what you kind of feel like when you're a policyholder or an adjuster. You go into a property and you're like, this doesn't make sense. But there is a science behind everything.
100%. And I used to joke with people, customers on storm, when they would talk about this, or especially if they'd had an event before and they were comparing the 2 situations, and they're like, well, they had 3 times the amount of dehus that you do. I mean, I just don't understand. I said, look, once it's wet, it's wet. There's no short of it's just varying level of saturation. That's a thing, absolutely. But when it sits for a week or it sits for 3 weeks, what's wet? And at some point, you can't draw any more water into a material to make it any worse. So there is no logic around, well, if we set 3 dehus is what it asks for, we should set 7 because this water was here for so long, it really needs it. No, you set 3. The formulas that ICRC has put together are driven around, here's what it takes to dry this structure within 3 to 4 days. Storm is a little different because you have materials that may really soak up that water because it's usually been there for a while. But that's all it takes. Doing more is not really necessary, and doing less definitely doesn't help you out there. Yeah. So that is essentially in a nutshell covers us from the equipment standpoint. Let's talk about placement and things of that nature after that. I think I'm still doing pretty good on time on everything. Good. So after we understand what's going into a site, after we understand exactly what we're dealing with, The next thing we need to understand are the counts. We talked a lot about it already. Talked a lot about, it's the biggest source of stress and strife for customers and even adjusters, because everybody's trying to put some understanding around it. Easiest thing to this, and really the counts are very simple and straightforward, although it's the one thing that everybody kind of has the most stress over, is it's a calculation. It's math. Drying is a science and equipment is math. If you properly record the area that's affected, how much material is affected, what the material is, then there's an absolute formula from the ICRC that states within that specific room even, because how drying logs have to be broken down that way, here's how much equipment you need to have in that space. It will give you a range on air movers between X and Y. Usually the float is, 2 to 3, sometimes 1 to 2. And then on the dehumidification, you have a very specific number, and then what you are kind of allowed or allowed. And I'd love to get your feedback on this, because this is what we've always understood. You get about a 10% play. So if you have a situation where it says you need to pull 200 pints per day, then we know we've got a play there of about 180 to 220, depending on what we can configure, because these have set amounts. This is 60. This is 80. This is 110. This is 100. I can't hit on the money every value in that range, but I can get pretty close if I get in the right combination of what it is. Does that sound about fair from an adjusting side? Yeah. So when you walk into a site and you have this situation of a feeling of it's too much, again, that very simple question, why? Because, hey, I'm not doubting you. Just help me understand. I just need to see in the dry report where it shows in the conference room you need to have 20 fans, because I can't see it. And if they can show you on that dry log where it's shown and supported by the ICRC calculation that there's supposed to be 20 air movers there, by all means, it's 20 air movers.
And that's something y'all record daily.
Absolutely.
Your team's out there looking at these things, recording this thing, putting this on paper. Because like one thing we experience from adjuster, if it's not there, it's not recorded.
Didn't happen. That's right.
And the same thing with notes. Anything that you do with the file wasn't in the file, did not happen. So that's another. I'm glad that your team's out there recording this information, looking at this information, putting it on paper, so that we have that conversation. We can ask the questions, because you can throw an air scrubber in there, which you're not supposed to do. Throw one in there and put it on a piece of paper. But if I don't ask you the question, well, why is it here? I mean, who's getting billed for it?
That's right.
At the end of the day,
somebody's going to end up paying for it one way or the other. And they may not be. They may not be supposed to be paying for it, for sure. And it is. And that's really day one. I mean, the reality is these counts, what you experienced yesterday, the reason you saw Casey come out first is that's a first responder. That first responder's job is to go to the site and to look out and say, okay, what am I dealing with? Get some preliminary measurements, understand the area, what materials are affected. She then calls back to the office and says, okay, I need 3 and 30. This is what I need based off what we call Dry Book has told us and how we need to do it. So the big thing is, this is also, when you talk about counts, that is where we see some of the variations in equipment too. You see those axial fans for larger open areas for airflow, and you're wanting to make sure that you're getting everything placed properly to create the right amount of flow to get through the dehumidifiers. One fun little note to kind of state before we move on the counts is, and this really is much more so in the storm situations than anything else, the reality around storm is 9 times out of 10 we're dealing with Cat 3 losses. As I said, either it's a flood, which obviously is Cat 3, or regrettably it's a Cat 2 that's transitioned to Cat 3 because it's just been there for a period of time because of how many people need help. In those scenarios, and we're pulling 4 foot up on drywall, we're pulling flooring material, we're really just drying sill plates, studs, things like that. In those situations, you really think about it, you don't need 100% of the equipment that the IRCRC even allows you to put in. Because if you think of it in a sense, if you got a large square room, if it's all open area, you're only putting air movers on the perimeter walls of that large square room, right? Yep. If you then cut that room into 4 equal sections, right, you cross-hatch it possibly, now you have 4 rooms. Well, in a traditional loss, you would have to put air movers on all those walls within those 4 rooms. Mm-hmm. What you end up placing then is a lot higher quantity of air movement because you have more space you're having to deal with, more square footage, linear footage if you want. If you pull all those walls in the example of having those 4 separate rooms, If I have drywall there, I'm drying 2 pieces of drywall. I have to dry it from both sides. I have an air mover in each of those rooms. If I pull out 4 foot of drywall in all those rooms, I have effectively opened up that whole space.
Absolutely.
Now, I can't just do the perimeter wall, right? Because I still have the steel plates and the studs. But 9 times out of 10, I don't have to dry both sides of a stud nose to nose on an air mover, because all it is that one sill plate that's there. So I can offset air movers. I can do certain things to where I don't have to place the exact counts that are necessary. So the end all be all statement, especially around storm, is you can have what the IICRC states is the right amount of equipment, but you could have less for air movers, never for dehumidifiers. You still have to get that moisture out at the same rate as far as the air. But if you see a site and it goes, wow, it looks like they're a little short here. Again, that's the question. Could be that they're telling you that exact logic makes sense, move on down the road. If they don't and go, well, we just only had 4. Well, but now if you only had 4 and I need 30, now my dry time's extended. How am I going to figure this out?
Yeah.
And so it's a little different scenario. So
Interesting. So I got a question. So you mentioned Cat 3.
mm-hmm.
So, we always say that, we got Cat 3 water, Cat 3 water. So, in our loss yesterday, water fountain bust.
Mm-hmm.
Goes all over the floor, goes in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Would you qualify that as Cat 3?
It's Cat 3. We're going to tear out the whole building. No,
We probably want to remodel anyway.
we should.
So we remodeled 4 times.
It's not that old, right? It's
Well, that's the new section. So it's old now.
That's right. That's right. No, that's Cat 2. I mean, the reality is how we view it. How we look at it is, if you're dealing with a situation where you are less than 72 hours, mm-hmm. you are not dealing with what we would term a Cat 3 water source, i.e. sewage backup, groundwater, whatever it may be. A flood
comes in
and out, right? Things like that. It's Cat 2. But we do obviously subscribe to, and we feel strongly around, if you have water that is sat or sits in a structure past that 72-hour period, and not just us, we base it off of the S500 out of the IICRC. It's Cat 3. There's a certain liability that we take on if we go to a customer and say, oh, it's probably fine, don't worry about it. And that's why we have to treat it as Cat 3. We have to make sure that we protect ourselves as we go.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Good question. It's a great question.
We got a few more minutes, about 10 minutes.
5. We can be quick.
Okay.
But you know what's funny though? The Cat 3 piece, that's the biggest sticking point when we're on storm. Especially if it's a very large event, everybody starts to be much more critical around what categories that loss. Yeah. So you move to the next slide, Chris. Thank you. So last piece we're going to talk about today is placement. Again, very simple. It's not really complex. The easiest way I can put this is, you want to create, or the mitigator wants to make sure he's creating a vortex or that circulation of air. The thing to look out for this from an adjusting standpoint is, if you do walk into a site and it's very haphazard and there's just air movers facing all different directions, there seems to be no airflow that's consistent. Mm-hmm. If you do that, you can't properly dehumidify, because you want to push that air in a circular motion to where it eventually gets to those dehumidifiers and it's drawing it in and stripping out that moisture. That's the biggest piece.
So you should stand in the middle of the room, and if you spin in one direction, you're good.
That's right. That's right.
Vortex going, you're good.
Exactly. If you just make sure it's all the same direction, you're in good shape. But that's really it. So you get. I have absolutely seen photos of layouts where
fans point at each other.
100%. And you may see. I mean, in the picture that's here, you can see a fan on its side. Mm-hmm. That makes total sense. Mm-hmm. If you're in a situation and you're trying to, in that water, say in this situation particularly, so let's say the water level was 2 foot up. Mm-hmm. I absolutely would do this, because I want to make sure that I'm pushing air all the way up that stud structure instead of everything 6 to 8 inches off the ground. I want to get it up.
So would that be an opportunity to bring in the actual fan? Would it be something to bring in one of those, because you're getting more of a volume of push of air versus just the direction?
Much more so. If you have a loft that your water level was 3-4 feet, you want to push a huge volume of air across those surfaces. Another great example for that axial, Craig, is when you have a big open space. If you have a warehouse, it's great that you're touching the perimeters, but you've got to push that air in the center or it's going to sit stagnant. So it's very likely you'll see things on perimeter or air movers on perimeter walls, and then you'll see an interior row that's trying to push all that air from the center into the vortex. So then it's circulated properly.
Right into
To these DUs are probably that's again at that point.
Yeah, sure. That's something much better. So yeah, so something like this you would see on the side. It's not wrong.
No,
It's just now we're just getting a higher, more concentrated in a sense, push along that wall to push that water, push that moisture back to that dehu.
Mhm.
As long as they're not pointing at each other.
that's right. They have to have a
Pointing in
pattern.
different directions. It's all about the pattern.
Right. It's again, as most things are with math and science, there's a pattern, there's a reason. If it looks haphazard, that doesn't kind of follow the logic around math and science. It's that there's
And if it
nothing
looks haphazard, ask.
Yes, always ask.
Ask. Why are we doing this?
And you might be entertained by the answers you get. It could be fun. Who knows?
I'm sure because.
That's right. That's what so-and-so told me. Well, okay, that's not enough. So, and that's it. I mean, that's the biggest piece for what we're going to go through today. I don't know if we have time for questions from anybody.
Any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Next slide.
People tell
on
me that
here
I'm
yet.
wrong.
Amber, does anyone have any questions? Do you have
No,
any?
they don't.
Can you hear her?
No, can you hear me?
Anyway, she can chat. So
Throw it in the chat box if you do, please.
I don't have any questions. I think all my questions have been answered, from the standpoint of a policyholder and an adjuster. Like I said, we go out and like you point out, it's a sea of green.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully green.
And it's like, okay, what are we doing with this? Does it all make sense? Now we understand just the bits and pieces of, when we see one of these out there, we immediately go, oh, can't do that because, that's where our coverage is.
Yeah.
But we understand what, a lot of times we see these dehumidifiers out there and we don't know what the purpose of them are. And we may see, 3 of these giant ones in a little shed. We're like, why do we have, now that I know, look at it and go, what? Okay, this is 2,000. This is how many gallons does this pull out? Or
That was 100 pints per day.
and how what is this? 80. So now I go out and I see, let's say I see one of these in a small little tiny room and immediately go, no, we should be over here. We should be down
100%.
here somewhere. And then I would come and say, okay, why do we have this? What's the purpose? And you may, as not you, but the other company, somebody may come along and say, well, we have this because it's all I had on my truck.
Right.
Okay. All right, well, that's fine. We now have a discussion about this. We understand why we have this. We can take that information, explain it to the examiner, explain it to everybody, this is why we're doing something, and just at that point see where it goes from there. Because we need to get that structure dry. We need to get that back, whatever it takes to get that property back in place. This may be the only thing we have on site at the time. This may be the only reason. But unless we have that communication, we're not going to know. So, and then understanding the spider box and every other piece of equipment, like I said, most of the stuff we look at, being a policyholder, like I said, I see it every day, deal with it every day. But now that you actually physically deal with the experience, which is a whole new dynamic, it's a whole other dynamic. But then I know the question to ask.
Yeah.
So why are you charging me so much?
Because we're worth it.
We do have one question.
All right.
When would heaters be used to assist in drying?
That's
We
a
do see that.
great question.
Mhm.
Fantastic question. So a couple things, especially with the freeze. When you have a situation where you have very low temperatures or you don't have power and you have burst pipes, things of that nature, these, and the way they're structured, they actually work off of that heat exchange. The problem with that is if you have very cold temperatures inside the structure, we've had situations where we've worked on losses and it's 40 degrees inside the structure. Then at the same time, you can have these still because we live in Mobile and we don't carry a bunch of desiccant-driven dehumidifiers like a lot of mitigation companies do up north.
Yeah.
But we can use space heaters to raise the temperature within the space. So then these actually will be effective and they'll draw that moisture out. Another reason we'll use heaters quite a bit are in crawl spaces. We have to dry out that crawl space. And given that it is an unconditioned space,
Absolutely.
you can't just leave it. It'll take too long. You'll start to get growth. We'll use heaters in those situations to draw that moisture out
Raising the
faster.
temperature, which helps draw the moisture out.
Absolutely. Get all that moisture out much, much faster. And then at that point, we can make sure that everything's safe and we have the right plan.
So it's just the heater's not there just to keep the employees warm, and so they're
Well, I'll tell you that. I will tell you this. I would lie to you if I told you that had never happened, but I will tell you it kind of goes the way of this.
Yeah.
That's there for our people then. That's not there for a customer to have to be billed. That's there to keep our people warm. If you work in those 40-degree temperatures for long, it's not a ton of fun.
No, it's not at all.
So,
Luckily, we don't have it very often down here.
No, it's not.
Yeah, other place in the country, absolutely. So,
100%. Absolutely. We do.
so any more questions?
That's all we have.
So,
And I will say, if you don't mind, if we have just 2 seconds,
Go
you
ahead.
mentioned a great point about sizing and things like
Mhm.
this. Shared air with dehumidification is a big piece that we help to try to educate people on a lot. And what I mean by that is you could have one room that's affected, relatively small room, but let's say it's an open doorway. It's not a door. It doesn't have a door. You can't secure or
Yes.
close off the area. You have shared air into a larger space, things like that. There you have 2 options there. Either the mitigator needs to close off or build containment to close off that space to create the right amount of air that's shared, or you may see a huge dehu that's there because you're not only trying to then dehumidify that one 8x8 room, but any air that's shared through that doorway to make sure that we're trying to dry effectively at that point. And that is kind of a tough one because we have people who say, I don't want containment. I need to get in and out of here. Healthcare facilities is a huge piece. We have very specific containment we built because they have to be able to roll a gurney through there at any given point or a wheelchair, whatever it may be.
So in a situation like that, where you have a small room and you have this open area, would it be a good situation to put one dehu in the other room as well?
No, because your goal isn't to dehumidify
Yeah,
the room.
true.
There's nothing wrong with it.
It's
But
just
you
you
are
got
going to
some-
draw that air in.
Okay.
And so you have to compensate for the fact that I'm not just drying this little area, I'm drying this area,
Plus-
plus also the air drawn in from another place. The best thing to do is to build containment. You really only have to worry about that if you have a customer that is just active and will not let you close off that
Makes
space.
sense.
All right, guys, we have hit our 1 hour mark.
Perfect.
So-
We have good times here to keep us on track.
No more questions. Good.
No
Okay.
more questions?
So
Yeah, I'm good.
we're good. Questions, okay?
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, hey,
Thank
we
you.
really appreciate the time putting all this together for us. Walking us through this.
You're welcome.
The fact that I don't know who snuck over to my office yesterday morning and busted the fountain so that we could do this live.
Julie's always here for
It was
us.
Yeah.
great. So you're the one who sabotaged.
Well, I just wanted you to have something to talk about.
That's perfect. So
Yeah, I was looking out for you.
I hope everybody that had participated, listened in today, you got something out of this. I mean, I personally did, like I said, for doing this for, I can't tell you how many years now, and also being a policyholder. I learned something from this presentation. I learned some of what the equipment is. It's not just you look out there and you see this equipment sitting around. We know what it's there for. We know why it's there. And when you see a situation where it just doesn't look right, ask the company what they're doing, why they're doing it.
100%.
And then you have that opportunity to talk to the policyholder. You have the opportunity to educate the policyholder. The more they get the information, the more they're educated, the more they understand the claims process, and it basically all just goes back to the customer service. At the end of the day, we're there to make sure that customer is taken care of. We're to make sure the customer understands that process, because in a lot of situations, y'all probably see this all the time, customers never experienced this before. They've never dealt with this before. They have no idea what these things are. And all they see is a bunch of hopefully green machines sitting inside their property, and they don't know what's going on. And the worst thing that happened, if you're not having that conversation and communicating with them, they may get stuck with a big bill that the policyholder stuck with. And that's what we want to avoid by having these conversations. So we can hit it up front, hit it early in the claims process to make sure, okay, this shouldn't be there. Can't do this.
Right.
We're having that conversation with everybody involved, and everybody knows where the process is going to be. So again, thank you all for being a part of this presentation. Appreciate your time.